Hello, my name is Meg and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I am going to be showing you how to dye yarn on both a superwash base as well as a non-superwash base. So grab something delicious and cozy to drink, sit down and join me in the dye studio. Hello, and thank you so much for tuning into my YouTube channel. My name is Meg, and I am the yarn dyer behind Megs & Co. And I am currently filming downstairs in my little film studio that I set up that's directly adjacent to my dye studio. I am in Rochester, New York, which is way western upstate, pretty close to like the Canadian border. And I am so excited to be dyeing up some yarn for you today. So today I have two pans going. There's pretty hot yarn. One pan I'm dyeing my Sport Organic Merino Sport. It is a non-superwash yarn, and in this pan I'm actually dyeing a brand new yarn that I have not listed yet in the shop. It is a superwash yarn. It's DK weight, but it is from US Rambouillet Merino wool. So I'm really excited about this. It's something that I've actually had this yarn for a couple months now, and I just haven't really had time to focus on building a collection for it. So I've got a couple colors going so far. I have actually been knitting with it, and it's really scrumptious. So it's something that I'm probably going to be introducing into the shop around February. In case you're tuning in at some random time, it's currently December. I think today is December 10th. So yeah, let's jump right in. So I'm going to actually be dyeing the same exact color on both pans, but I wanted to show you guys the difference between dyeing superwash yarn and non-superwash yarn, because they do take the dye very differently. So even though we've got a very similar wool content, we've got Rambouillet Merino, and Rambouillets are, even though it is technically a different breed of sheep, they are they've been crossbred with merino wool, so it's a very similar quality wool, and it's a very low micron count, super soft, love it. And then in my non-superwash pan, I have 100% merino wool. So we're not going to have too much differences between the breeds here because they're very similar from the same family. But what is going to be different is that treatment of superwash versus non-superwash. So I'm going to jump in and start going. So the pans have been heating for about 30 minutes. I'm going to be doing a lot of speckling with this color, and especially because I'm working with non-superwash, I need that non-superwash wool to be nice and hot so that it is going to take the speckles as quickly as it can. So the biggest difference between dyeing superwash and non-superwash yarn, in terms of how it reacts to the dye, is that, I don't want to like drip and spill here, is that superwash wool takes the dye very quickly. So colorways that you see, very sharp, bright, crisp speckles, like tiny speckles, that is usually on superwash yarn. And colors that you see more wide expanses of color, that's usually non-superwash yarn. So it has much more like a watercolor effect where the speckle isn't going to just, boom, adhere to the yarn. It's going to take a little time to fix to that yarn, which means it has time to spread out a little bit on the skein. Another thing with when I'm working with non-superwash wool is that I have to be incredibly gentle with it. So superwash treated yarn, the purpose of it is to make it more heat resistant so that it doesn't felt when you put it in the wash. So non-superwash yarn is extremely vulnerable to felting, and felting happens when you have agitation, water, and heat. all the things that we have while dyeing yarn. So I just am much more gentle and delicate when I'm playing with it. I try to avoid how many times I'm picking it up out of the pan. I just want to be really careful with it. So you can see I'll push and work this yarn a lot more you know, abruptly, I guess is the right word. You know, like I can do this and it's not going to felt, it's not going to affect the yarn. I don't want to mix and beat this pan up because it's going to start, those fibers are going to start rubbing together and stick together, and I don't want that. Okay, nice and hot. I've also already added my acid to the water. So I use citric acid. It's essentially a white powder. It's once it dissolves in water to become colorless, it's odorless. And that's why I like it. I also like that I can control exactly how much citric acid I'm putting into the water, so I have a very precise control over the pH. I add about a big heaping tablespoon of water to each of my pans. And so I will use a pH strip. You can get them at pool supply stores, you can get them on Amazon, and you just take the pH of your water, and so over time I know how much citric acid that I need to add to my water. Everyone's water is going to be a little bit different depending on where you live regionally. We have a lot of limestone in my area, so the water actually tends to be a bit basic, so I need to add probably more acid to, you know, somewhere else in the country that maybe their water is just naturally a little bit more acidified. So take the pH of your water, add citric acid, and figure out exactly where you need to be to get that really good balance. Now that I know, I generally don't pH on a regular basis, but I do try to check it at least seasonally, quarterly. I do tend to find that it does shift a little bit depending on the season. Being in Western New York, we add a road salt to all of our roads, so I'm always suspicious by how the pH will change a bit in the winter. You know, is it all that salt that's being added to our water, even though it's supposed to be all filtered out and whatnot? It can affect the pH. So I don't know, that's just my hunch. So I do have, it's hot water, it's acidified water, so it should be ready to take that dye nice and fast. So I'm going to go ahead and speckle the first color. I am wearing my N95 respirator mask for safety. Anytime you're working with dry dye powders, you don't want to breathe that in. You know, they're dyes, they're heavy metals. While they are non-toxic, they are just not good for your lungs at all. So wear a mask.
From above, every day would seem turning into love song.
Okay, I just speckled the first color, and you really can't see too much of a difference yet. They're both speckling very nicely, which is fantastic. This is my this is my superwash pan. This is my non-superwash pan. But over time, you're going to see that these speckles are going to stay mostly in place. You know, you're going to have some bleeding into the water, but you're going to still get these areas of nice, sharp speckles. you can already start to see how these speckles are going to start to gradually kind of almost like wick into the yarn, you know, like how water will kind of travel through a paper towel. The color is going to travel for a little bit before it actually is fixed to that yarn, versus this is going to fix super fast. I'm using two different greens, but I'm using two different greens that tend to lean very blue. And so I love speckling with them because you can see they tend to break out blue, yellow, and green. And both of these are going to break out these same colors. The second one is just a much darker green, and it's even more bluer. So it's going to break out even more blue and green. This dye tends to separate between green, blue, and yellow, and it's just a little bit lighter. So I'm going to go ahead and speckle my second color.
From above, every day would seem turning into love zone.
And when I speckle, I just pick up a very tiny, tiny little pinch of dye, and I'm just rubbing my fingers really delicate together. You start to kind of get used to how the dyes feel, and some of the dyes are a little bit stickier, and so I kind of have to like flick a little bit. And some are more of like the texture of sand, and they'll kind of just fall out of your fingers really nice. I've tried using different tools, different like shakers. This is probably my favorite tool if I was going to use a tool. It's like a baking one, like a dusting baking one for like, I think you're supposed to put like powdered sugar in it and, you know, kind of dust over a cake for decoration. But ultimately I find that I just really like the control of my fingers because I can feel exactly how much dye is in my fingers and how much I'm releasing. So if I have a big bare area, you know, I can kind of release a little bit more. If I have an area where I just need a little touch of color, you know, I can firm up my fingers so I'm not really releasing it. This just tends to go everywhere. So it's actually a really fun tool, and maybe I'll need to film a video where I am dyeing with it because it is fun. It drops a lot of color, but it is fun to work with. But for repeatability, I find that using my fingers, I just have the most control. So that's what I do. So I'm just going to let this sit. I want this to get nice and hot. I want those speckles to fix to the yarn before I touch and move this. I'm really liking what I'm seeing so far, and it's kind of funny. I'm actually not really seeing that much of a difference between the two pans. This is kind of spreading out almost just as much. Like I'm still seeing some beautiful sharp crisp speckles in here, which is great. And a lot of that is because I am working with that high heat and the already acidified water. So I'm just driving that dye as quickly as I can to the yarn. So I'm going to let this sit. This one green can kind of take some time. So I'm gonna let this sit a good like 25 minutes to a half hour, and then I'll come right back. I'm back. Boy, I actually just spent the last half hour outside with my ducks. It's freezing outside. I think it's like maybe like 33 degrees or something outside, so I'm so cold. And so I'm grateful to be able to be over these nice hot pans because I need some heat. So I apologize if my nose is runny. Consequence of playing outside. Okay, so we have our two pans, and I have to say, I am so impressed with how our non-superwash is coming out as well as our superwash. And I feel like this happens every time that I film a video where I'm trying to highlight something specific. And these pants look very close, which is great. So I feel like this is turning out to not be the absolute best example of how exactly non-superwash yarn speckles look different, because these actually look fantastic. But this area is probably the most like representative of normally what happens, even though we are getting some spreading out with this guy. So I'm going to go ahead and flip these over. Where are my tongs? I also like to mix the skeins up, as in like whoever was in the middle is now going to be on the outside. That just helps keep things consistent. Sometimes the outside skeins tend to get a little bit darker, so if I keep mixing them up every time I flip them, it helps keep things a little bit more consistent. So this side is our non-superwash side. So again, I'm just going to be very delicate, very careful with how I am. Whoopsies. I've got a camera up here for my pan cam and I just totally bonked it. So a little bit of tangling. Okay. So I just am being just very cognizant of not agitating, just letting it fall into the pan. Minimal movements, because again, we have hot water. So this could potentially felt very quickly and easily. So I'm just, that's pretty much all the manipulation I'm going to do. I'm just going to let it be. So I have 2 more colors to add, and both of these colors are going to be added fairly quickly. And I'm just going to be pouring them. So this is somewhere between like a yellow and an orange. It actually comes out a little bit like a yellowy tan. And I like to just kind of fill in some of these bare spots to bring out some of that yellow. So I'm focusing on these areas of white. But I also want this color to be everywhere, so I'm kind of pouring onto the white, but then spreading it, moving it around, trying to be really careful again to not really move our fibers around too much. And I'll do the same thing on this pan. One thing that I am seeing very clearly that's different is just how much kind of deeper and darker the colors are on superwash yarn. So this is our pan, and it's just everything just colors just always just seem to strike richer, darker, more vibrant. So even though the same exact recipe was just added, I only made 1 batch of this color that I just added, and all I did was divide it in 2. So the same exact dye went into both of these pans, and whereas this came out like a much more pale muted tan, this actually has bits of yellow in it. And again, that's just that difference of the superwash versus the non-superwash. Superwash yarn, it just reacts so phenomenally with the dye. So it's just something to be aware of, you know, as you're mixing up your colors, that if you don't want them to look different, you could potentially just add a higher concentration of dye to your non-superwash to get them to be even. But as you're designing your own colors, just being aware that, you know, how differently they might look from one fiber type to the other and from one treatment to the other. So now I'm moving on to a green. This is a really fun green. It's like a minty green. And I am just seeking out areas that need a little bit of color. And I want it to be even, so I don't want to intentionally like focus on like the top or the bottom because I want this to be even. But I also want to make sure that I'm getting full color coverage. It's such a fun color. This is a colorway that I call Lift Bridge. So I technically live in Fairport, not Rochester, which is just a cute little suburb of Rochester, about 15 minutes outside of downtown. And we are right on the Erie Canal, which is a historic waterway in New York. And our town, or I should say our village of Fairport, has a lift bridge where the whole bridge, if a boat needs to go through, the whole bridge actually lifts up, like on like stilts kind of. I don't know. It's neat. There's a lot of history to the bridge. It was built in the like 1920s. And it just gives our village just so much character. So our whole village is on the canal. There's a canal path that people like to bike and run and walk. Creates a very outdoorsy vibe to our little village, and the bridge is kind of, you know, the main picture. When you see like photos of Fairport, it's always the bridge. So this bridge, it reminds me of the water, but also all of those nice trails and pathways that are alongside the Erie Canal. So we have some steely colors like the bridge. The bridge is actually like a bright rusty orange color right now. But I think bridge and I think like metal. So I kind of went for like a gray blue here. And then I just wanted watercolors. So blues and greens, and representing like the lushness of the path. It's a beautiful color. I love this color. And again, at least in my eyeballs, and I hope that the camera is capturing this correctly, even though, like I said, we've added the same exact recipe, this pan is just so much more of a watercolor, almost like a pastel color. And this pan with our superwash, you're getting pops of really bright color. They're both gorgeous. They're just different. And I love that. I love it. So these two colors that I added are very light. There's a very little bit of dye, so you can see that the water is almost fully exhausted. It's definitely fully exhausted on our superwash pan. There is no more dye in that water. This pan is done. This pan is still hitting quite a bit of green. And again, that's just, look at how clear this is. So just another difference between our superwash yarn. It's just going to take that dye instantly. Like this pan is done. I can move on to the next. But this pan's probably going to need another 15 minutes or so for all of that dye to get sucked in. But that's it. That is this color. So thank you so much for tuning in yet again to another episode. If there's anything that you want to see, if you have any questions about yarn dyeing, you know, let me know. Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know what you want to see, what you want to learn about, how you want to dye your yarn. And I hope to see you next time. Please like and subscribe to my page. It goes a long way to really help my reach and whatnot. And I look forward to seeing you soon.